Madison came back from her mother's house that Friday evening with her usual overnight bag, but something was different. She mumbled a quick "Hey, Dad," before disappearing into the kitchen, her tone clipped and distant. "How was the weekend?" I called after her. "Fine," she replied, barely audible. She grabbed a soda from the fridge and leaned against the counter, her gaze glued to the floor. At 17, Madison had her moods, but this one seemed heavier. Something was off. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just tired," she muttered. I decided not to push her. She was like her mother that way, prone to shutting down when something was bothering her. That Sunday, we went to a barbecue at my ex-wife Rachel's house. These blended family gatherings were always a balancing act. Rachel's husband Greg was pleasant enough, but his younger brother Ryan had a knack for being the life of the party in a way that grated on my nerves. Ryan was charming, mid-30s, loud, and always quick with a joke. He greeted everyone with his usual energy, but when he said to Madison, "Hey, Maddie, looking good as always," it hit me wrong. Madison's shoulders tensed as she mumbled a response, her eyes darting away from him. I noticed how she avoided him the rest of the afternoon, while Ryan's gaze seemed to follow her more than it should. On the way home, I asked, "Everything okay with you and Ryan?" He seemed a little friendly. Her head snapped toward me. "What? No, it's fine. He's fine." Her answer came too fast, her voice too defensive. I let it go for the moment, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. That night, Madison came downstairs long after I thought she'd gone to bed. She stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Dad," she said softly, her voice wavering. "What's up, Maddie?" She hesitated, her eyes welling up. "I think I made a mistake." "A big one? What kind of mistake?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Her words came out in a rush, her voice trembling. Ryan started saying things. At first, it was just like compliments, but then it got more than that. I froze, my mind racing. More than that, how? She took a shaky breath. "We had an affair," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Anger, guilt, and disbelief crashed over me like a wave. "Madison, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't your fault. Do you understand me? He's the adult. He's the one who crossed the line. But I let it happen," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. My fists clenched as the reality of her words sank in. Ryan had crossed a boundary that should never have been touched, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The morning after Madison's confession, I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my cup of coffee. My hands were clenched around the mug, its heat doing nothing to thaw the cold rage inside me. Madison was still upstairs, sleeping or pretending to. I didn't blame her for retreating. I could barely face myself. The details of what she'd said were still swirling in my mind, impossible to ignore. Ryan, her step-uncle, had wormed his way into her trust, using his charm to twist the boundaries of what was right. And I'd missed it. I'd missed every sign. By the time Madison came downstairs, it was nearly noon. She looked hesitant, like she was bracing herself for a fight. I tried to soften my expression as she sat across from me. "I called in sick to work," I said quietly. "Figure we could talk." She groaned, dropping her head into her hands. "Dad, I don't want to—" "Madison," I interrupted gently, "I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at him." Her eyes flickered to mine, wary but searching for reassurance. "You think I'm disgusting, don't you?" "No," I said firmly, leaning forward. "You're my daughter. I don't think that. Not for a second. But I need to understand what happened." She exhaled shakily, clutching her mug of tea like it was a lifeline. "It started months ago," she admitted. "At one of the barbecues. Right? I don't know. Pay attention to me. Compliment me. At first, I thought he was just being nice. But then he'd text me stuff like, 'You're more mature than most girls your age.'" My stomach twisted. I kept my expression neutral, but every word was like a knife. "And you responded?" I asked, careful to keep my tone free of judgment. She nodded. At first it felt good, like someone noticed me. But then it got weird. He started saying things like, "If only I were younger," or that Greg and my mom didn't understand me the way he did. I clenched my jaw. Ryan's pattern was clear now. He'd groomed her, luring her in with flattery and attention. When did it escalate? Madison hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. A couple of weeks ago. I was at Mom's, and Greg was working late. Ryan came over to check on us. He said he just wanted to talk, but she trailed off, her face crumpling. It went too far. I felt my fist tighten involuntarily. Madison, he manipulated you. This wasn't your fault. I let it happen, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. I didn't stop him. You're a kid, Maddie. He's a grown man. He knew exactly what he was doing. I spent the rest of the day grappling with what to do. Calling the police seemed obvious, but Madison begged me not to. If Mom finds out, she started, her voice trembling. She'll hate me? She won't hate you, I said, though I wasn't sure. Rachel wasn't exactly the forgiving type, and her loyalty to Greg's family could complicate things. Still, I couldn't sit on this. I decided to start with a direct confrontation. I texted Ryan. We need to talk. Tonight. My place. Don't make me come looking for you. That evening, Ryan showed up just after dark, all casual arrogance. He leaned against the doorframe with his usual grin, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his eyes. What's up, Ethan? Thought we were cool. I stepped aside, letting him in. Sit. He raised an eyebrow, but obeyed, dropping onto the couch. I stayed standing, arms crossed. You've been texting my daughter, I began, my voice calm but firm. His grin faltered. Whoa, what's this about? Cut the crap, Ryan, I snapped. Madison told me everything. Every disgusting thing you've done. For a moment, he froze, his expression flickering between panic and denial. Then he leaned back, trying to play it cool. Look, Ethan, kids exaggerate. She probably misunderstood. Don't, I interrupted sharply. Don't even try to gaslight me. You knew exactly what you were doing. You've been grooming her, using her insecurities to get close. Ryan stood, hands raised defensively. Hey now, you're making me sound like some kind of predator. She came to me, okay? I didn't start this. The words hit me like a slap. She's a child, Ryan. You're the adult. His face darkened. You don't know what it's like, he muttered. She wanted someone to listen to her. I was just being there for her. I didn't let him finish. I lunged forward, grabbing his collar. You've got two choices, I growled. You disappear from her life completely, or I call the cops. And if you think for a second I won't ruin you, try me. Ryan's bravado crumbled. He nodded, his voice shaking. Okay. I'll stay away. I released him, my hands trembling with rage. If I ever see you near her again, you'll regret it. He left without another word, and I slammed the door behind him. Upstairs, Madison was waiting at the top of the stairs, her face pale. What did he say? He's gone, I said. He won't come near you again. Her relief was palpable, but the damage was still there, etched into her face. As I sat beside her, I realized this was far from over. The trust she'd lost, in herself, in others, in me, would take time to rebuild. But I'd be there for her, every step of the way. In the days following my confrontation with Ryan, the atmosphere at home remained heavy. Madison was quieter than usual, retreating to her room for long stretches of time. I gave her space, but the silence gnawed at me. Each hour that passed without addressing the issue felt like a wound left untreated, festering. On the third night, just as I was about to head to bed, Madison appeared in the doorway of the living room. Her hair was messy, and she was wrapped in one of the old quilts her grandmother had given her. She looked smaller than usual, like she was trying to fold into herself. Dad, she said softly. I put down the book I'd been pretending to read. Hey, Maddie, can't sleep? She nodded and hovered there for a moment, looking like she was debating whether to come in or retreat. Come sit, I said, patting the couch. She hesitated, then shuffled over and plopped down next to me, curling her legs under her. For a while, we just sat there, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound. Did you mean it? She finally asked. Mean what? When you said it wasn't my fault? Her voice cracked slightly, and she stared at the coffee table as if it held the answers. I turned to face her, my chest tightening. Of course I'm in it. Maddie, he manipulated you. What happened? It's on him, not you. But I let him, she said, her voice trembling. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop it. I didn't even try. I wanted to reach out and hold her, but I knew she needed to get the words out first. Can you tell me what happened? I mean, really happened? She nodded slowly, though tears were already brimming in her eyes. It started so small, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, it was just him texting me. He'd say things like, "You're so mature for your age," or that I reminded him of someone he used to date. I thought he was just being nice. Her fingers twisted the edge of the quilt. Then, one night, Mom and Greg went out, and Ryan came over to hang out. He said he wanted to watch a movie, but halfway through, he started saying stuff. "What kind of stuff?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. She hesitated, then whispered, "He said I was beautiful. That Greg and Mom didn't appreciate me the way he did. And then he kissed me." I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my composure. "Did you tell him to stop?" "I didn't know what to do," she said, tears spilling over. I froze. And then it just happened. After that, he kept texting me, telling me to keep it a secret. He said no one would understand. My heart ached for her. The guilt she was carrying wasn't hers to bear, but it had wrapped itself around her like chains. "Maddie," I said softly, "you didn't let him do anything. He preyed on you. That's on him. Do you hear me?" She nodded, though she didn't look convinced. As she went to bed that night, I realized this wasn't something I could fix with a single conversation. Madison had been manipulated, her trust twisted into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just about keeping Ryan away anymore, it was about helping her heal. But as much as I wanted to focus on her, there was still one loose thread that I couldn't ignore: Rachel. The next morning, I decided to call Rachel. It wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but she needed to know the truth. She picked up on the third ring, her voice clipped. "Ethan, this better not be about rescheduling weekends again. I told you, Greg and I." "It's not about weekends," I interrupted. "It's about Ryan." There was a pause. "What about him?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Madison told me what he's been doing. He's been inappropriate with her. More than inappropriate." The line went silent. "Rachel?" I prompted. "You're serious?" she finally said, her voice flat. "Dead serious." Her tone turned icy. "Are you accusing my brother-in-law of what? Coming on to Maddie? That's ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous," I shot back. "She told me everything, Rachel. He's been texting her, grooming her, and it went further than that. You need to deal with this. You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, though I could hear the tremor in her voice. "Ryan's always been friendly. Maybe Maddie misunderstood." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't you dare put this on her. Your brother-in-law is a predator, and if you don't believe me, that's on you. But I'm not letting him near her again." The line went quiet again, and when Rachel finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "I'll talk to Greg," she said. "We'll handle it." "You'd better," I said, hanging up before my anger got the better of me. That evening, Madison asked me if I'd told her mom. She didn't take it well, I admitted, but I'll make sure she deals with it. Madison nodded, though she didn't seem comforted. "What if she doesn't believe me?" "I believe you," I said firmly, "and I'll keep fighting for you until everyone else does too." The days that followed were a blur of strained conversations and mounting tension. Madison kept her distance, her guilt and shame forming a wall I couldn't seem to break through. I kept trying, offering reassurance, reminding her it wasn't her fault, but it felt like trying to fill a canyon with handfuls of sand. Rachel, on the other hand, hadn't called back since our conversation. I'd expected at least an update, but the silence was deafening. I wasn't sure if she was in denial or if Greg was brushing it under the rug to protect his brother. Either way, the lack of acknowledgement felt like a betrayal of its own. One night, while Madison was in her room, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my blood run cold. "Ryan." Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ethan," he said, his tone casual, like this was any other call. "I think we need to talk." "We've already talked," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. "You're done here, Ryan. Stay away from Madison." He let out a dry chuckle. "You don't understand. This is getting blown out of proportion. Maddie, she's confused. She's young, Ethan. Sometimes teenagers say things they don't mean." The sheer audacity of his words made my grip tighten on the phone. "You're not seriously trying to blame her for this, are you?" "I'm not blaming anyone," he said smoothly. I'm just saying maybe we should keep this between us. No need to get anyone else involved. No cops, no drama. It took everything in me not to explode. This isn't a negotiation, Ryan. You crossed a line, and now you're going to face the consequences. I don't think you want to do that, he said, his tone turning cold. For Maddie's sake. Do you really want her dragged through all that? The questions, the investigations, the implication hung in the air like a noxious cloud. He wasn't just trying to save himself. He was threatening to use the system against Madison if I pursued this further. Stay away, I growled before hanging up. After the call, I paced the living room, trying to decide my next move. Every fiber of my being screamed to call the police, but Madison's earlier plea to keep this quiet stopped me. I couldn't force her to relive everything unless she was ready. But I couldn't let Ryan win, either. The next day, I decided to check in with Rachel in person. I needed to know where she and Greg stood on all of this, or if they were even taking it seriously. When I arrived, Rachel opened the door, her face tight with irritation. Ethan, I told you we'd handle it. And how's that going? I asked, stepping inside uninvited. She crossed her arms, glaring at me. Greg talked to Ryan. He says it's all a misunderstanding. Ryan swears he didn't mean anything by it. Didn't mean anything by it? I echoed, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself, Rachel? He manipulated your daughter and took advantage of her. This isn't some harmless misunderstanding. Lower your voice, she hissed. The neighbors. I don't give a damn about your neighbors, I snapped. What are you going to do about him? Because if you're not going to handle this, I will. Rachel's expression faltered. Greg thinks we should just keep Ryan away from Madison. No need to blow things out of proportion. He's family, Ethan. And what about Madison? I asked, my voice breaking. She's your family, too. Her eyes darted away, guilt flickering across her face. Listen to me, I said, stepping closer. If you don't take this seriously, I'll go to the cops myself. And if that means dragging Greg's precious brother through the mud, so be it. Your choice. She didn't respond, but the look on her face told me I'd struck a nerve. That night, Madison came downstairs while I was poring over the business card of a lawyer I'd looked up earlier. What's that? She asked, eyeing the card. Just someone who might help, I said, setting it aside. She sat across from me, her expression cautious. You're not calling the cops, are you? I hesitated. But I won't unless you're ready. Her shoulders sagged in relief, though the tension didn't completely leave her face. Thanks, Dad. I don't want people talking about me. I don't want everyone knowing. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Whatever you decide, Maddie, I'm here. You're not in this alone. She nodded, her lips trembling. For the first time in days, she leaned into me, letting me wrap her in a hug. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan's veiled threats. The man had no remorse, no shame. If he was willing to manipulate Madison, what else was he capable of? This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days stretched into a tense stalemate. Rachel avoided my calls, Greg stayed silent, and Madison's mood swung between guarded and despondent. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing by waiting for her to be ready, but the pit in my stomach grew with every passing hour. Ryan's smug, threatening voice still echoed in my ears, and I knew I couldn't let it go. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Madison was upstairs when my phone buzzed with a message that made my blood boil. Ryan, we should talk. Without replying, I grabbed my coat and keys. I drove to Ryan's apartment, the wipers slashing through the downpour. My thoughts were a blur, swinging wildly between rage and cold determination. By the time I reached his building, I had only one clear goal: end this one way or another. Ryan opened the door after my first knock, his trademark smirk already in place. Ethan, he said, leaning casually against the frame. Didn't expect you to stop by uninvited. Cut the act, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You know why I'm here? He shrugged, closing the door behind me. You got a knack for dramatics, you know that? I told you. Shut up, I snapped, rounding on him. You don't get to spin this. You preyed on my daughter. You used her trust, her insecurities, to feed your sick ego. Ryan's smirk wavered, but only slightly. Look, I get it. You're upset. But you're blowing this way out of proportion. Maddie's a smart girl. She knows what she's doing. She wanted. Before he could finish, I lunged, grabbing him by the front of his shirt and slamming him against the wall. The sound echoed through the small apartment. You don't get to say her name, I growled, my face inches from his. Not after what you've done. Ryan's composure finally cracked. His hands came up, trying to push me off, but I didn't budge. Ethan, calm down. You're making a mistake here. The only mistake, I said, my voice low and trembling with rage, was letting you anywhere near her. And now, you're going to stay away. Permanently. His eyes darted nervously, looking for an escape. Fine. Fine, okay. I'll stay away. Just let me go. I released him with a shove, and he stumbled forward, clutching his chest. You think this is over? I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. It's not. If I hear you've contacted her, if I so much as see your face near her again, I'll destroy you. Legally, physically, whatever it takes. Ryan straightened, his smirk creeping back onto his face like a reflex. You think you're some kind of hero? Go ahead, call the cops. But you know as well as I do, they'll put her under a microscope. Do you really want that? I stepped closer, my fist clenched. Try me? For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. When I got home, Madison was waiting in the living room, her eyes wide with worry. Where were you? She asked. I took care of it, I said simply, dropping my keys on the counter. Her brow furrowed. What does that mean? What did you do? I made sure he understands he's not to come near you again. She stared at me, searching my face for answers. You didn't hurt him, did you? No, I said, though the tension in my hands told a different story. But he knows where I stand, and he knows what'll happen if he crosses that line again. Madison nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Thanks, Dad. You don't have to thank me, Maddie. It's my job to protect you. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she stepped forward and hugged me tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt like I was finally getting through to her. Later that night, as I sat alone in the darkened living room, I knew this was only a temporary victory. Ryan might back off, but the damage he'd caused wouldn't disappear overnight. Madison would carry this with her for a long time, and I'd have to be there to help her shoulder it. But for now, I'd done what I could. In the weeks that followed, the house felt quieter. Madison still kept to herself more than usual, but the heavy tension had started to lift. She'd begun joining me for dinner again, occasionally even laughing at one of my lame jokes. Little moments like that felt like tiny victories, steps toward rebuilding what had been broken. I knew better than to think things were back to normal, though. This wasn't the kind of wound that healed overnight. One evening, as we were finishing dinner, Madison put down her fork and glanced at me hesitantly. Dad? Yeah? I asked, keeping my tone light. I've been thinking about therapy, she said, her words careful like she was testing the waters. I nodded, trying to hide my relief. I think that's a great idea. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Do you think you could find someone for me? I don't really know where to start. Of course, I said. I'll make some calls tomorrow. She gave me a small, grateful smile. True to my word, I spent the next day researching therapists, looking for someone who specialized in trauma in teenagers. By the end of the week, we had an appointment set up with a woman named Dr. Harper, whose warm, straightforward demeanor put Madison at ease almost immediately. The first session was tough. Madison came out of the office with red-rimmed eyes, her expression raw but lighter, like she'd shed some of the weight she'd been carrying. How'd it go? I asked as we walked to the car. It was hard, she admitted, but good, I think. I nodded, giving her space to process. Meanwhile, I had my own battles to fight. Rachel finally called me after weeks of silence, her tone defensive. Ethan, Greg, and I talked to Ryan. She began, skipping the pleasantries. He swears nothing happened. He says Madison's making it up to get attention. I gritted my teeth. She's not making it up, Rachel. You don't know that, she said, her voice rising. Ryan's family. Why would he lie? Why would Madison? I shot back. You know her, Rachel. Does she seem like the type to lie about something like this? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I don't know. I just don't know what to believe. Believe your daughter, I said firmly. Because if you don't, she'll never forgive you. And neither will I. She didn't respond, but but I could tell my words had landed. The next time Madison visited her mom's house, I made sure she felt safe. Greg had agreed to keep Ryan away indefinitely, but I wasn't taking any chances. I dropped her off myself and made it clear to Rachel that I'd be just a phone call away. When Madison came home that Sunday, she seemed lighter. "How was it?" I asked as she walked through the door. "Okay," she said, shrugging. "Mom was better than I expected. She actually apologized." I blinked, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah." She said she didn't know how to handle everything, but that she believes me now. Madison hesitated, then added, "She also said Greg's furious with Ryan. Apparently, he told him to stay away from all of us." "Good," I said. "That's how it should be." Over time, Madison's spark began to return. Therapy helped her unpack the complicated emotions she'd been holding on to: guilt, anger, confusion. And slowly, she started to rebuild her sense of self. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "Thanks, Dad, for believing me. For everything." I put an arm around her and pulled her close. "Always, Maddie. That's what dads are for." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. As for Ryan, I heard through the grapevine that he'd left town. Whether it was out of shame, guilt, or self-preservation, I didn't care. All that mattered was that he was gone. The scars from this experience would never fully fade for either of us. But we were stronger now, closer. And no matter what came next, I knew we'd face it together. Because if this ordeal had taught me anything, it was this: family isn't just about blood. It's about trust, love, and standing by each other, even when the world feels like it's falling apart.